in-person word. My name is Cameron. We are the Centre for Human Animal Studies at Edgehill University. We've set up this symposium to try and connect postgraduate researchers across the UK and the wider field to be able to discuss their research. We think that this is something that's kind of been sorely lacking and missing within the environment so far. Just in terms of a little bit of housekeeping, if you're in the room, toilets out this door and then to the left. The nearest fire escape is also in that same direction, so out the door, furthest to the left, and follow all the way through the garage, and there's a meeting point outside. And so we're going to start today by handing over to Alex Lockwood, who's an influential animal studies author, journalist, and activist. He's going to do a short activity to get us all warmed up, and then we're going to move into our first session.
Right. Yeah, thanks. I've been a friend and admirer of the Centre for Human Animal Studies at Edgehill for a long time. So really pleased just to get you started. I'm an author. I've been doing a lot of work with Animal Rising as well over the past few months, and teach creative writing over at Sunderland University. It's really nice to see a few names I recognise on your schedule for today. But rather than me read something out to you of my work, which is a bit boring, I wanted to do an activity to get your minds working, because it's obviously early. You might have had your coffees. But today for you is all about thinking critically, thinking flexibly, and thinking imaginatively. So I just wanted to do a couple of very quick writing exercises with you to get you thinking in those ways about language. And so get your mind open and questioning first thing in the morning. So there might be one or two people in this room who might have sat in on sessions of mine before, but I'm hoping not very many. But anyway, so let's get started. Let's make this really quick. So I'm going to do 3 exercises with you, and they're all going to be really quick. So I hope you've got something ready to write with, whether that be your laptop or pen and paper. So the first exercise is going to be one where you're going to write down 3 words. And obviously today is all about kinship and thinking about kinship, and particularly in crisis. But we're just going to play around with it. And I think today, to be flexible, imaginative, and critical, it's always good to be playful. So I want you to write down 3 words. And the first word is going to be an animal. The second's going to be a vegetable. And the third's going to be a mineral. And so think of an animal who you have a particular relationship with, so a companion animal or a particular favorite animal, for example, and write their name down. And then I want you to write down a particular vegetable. You might have a favorite sort of salad vegetable or whatever. So write that down. And then this one always catches people out, but write down a particular mineral. Now, you might have a favorite birthstone, for example, or you might have just, who knows, you might have a favorite mineral like potassium or magnesium might help you sleep. So it could be quartz, it could be amethyst, any of those. So an animal, a vegetable, and a mineral. And I want you to write those words down. And I'll give you 15 seconds just to get those. Okay, and what you're going to do is you're going to make a portmanteau word, which is you're going to take syllables from each of those 3 words that you've written down, and you're going to make a new name for yourself, which could, if you like it enough, be your name for today. And you might put it on a little white sticker and have it as a badge for today. So you're going to do a portmanteau word. So I'll give you an example. If my 3 words were Misha, my companion animal, quartz is my favorite stone, and cucumber, my favorite vegetable, I might come up with a name like that, Miss Quumba. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to create your own portmanteau name for the day. And when you've done it, just turn to the next person next to you and share it. Or if you're online, put it in the chat. Okay. And I'm hoping you've all done that. So just going to do 2 more quick fire exercises with you. So today is all about kin and kinship. And we normally think of kin, well, kin is a noun. And what I sometimes do with my students to get them to think flexibly and imaginatively about language is to play around with words so that we can always think of words from different angles, as it were. And that's useful for firing up the brain to think imaginatively and flexibly for a day like this. So obviously we think of kin as a noun, but we're going to change and play around with that. So we're going to think of it as a verb. So if I give you an example, I might wash my vegetables in a colander, and the colander there is a noun. I could switch it to say that I colandered the vegetables. So the colander becomes the verb in the sentence. So I'm going to give you a couple of quick exercises. I want you to write down now a sentence using kin as a noun. So just a simple sentence. Take you 10, 15, 20 seconds to write that. And so now, next exercise is just, I want you to then flip it, switch it. So I want you now to write a sentence, and you might just flip the sentence you've written, but now use the word kin as a verb in a sentence. And again, if you're doing this through Zoom, you could put your examples into the chat. Okay. And the very last exercise, sorry, I know I'm rushing through this, but this is a very, you've got a lot on today. I just want you to write your own creative, imaginative, as wild as you like, as exaggerated as you like, definition, a dictionary definition of the word kin as a verb. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds, yeah? A wild, imaginative, exaggerated dictionary definition of the word kin as a verb. And when you've done that, you might be able to share it briefly with the person sitting next to you. And so that's me done wrapping up. And I'm very pleased to have just jumped in there, maybe giving your brains a bit of a shake in the morning, and leave you to what looks like a really fantastic day. So a bit weird doing this with absolutely no feedback and no sound, but I hope that got your brains working a little bit. So thank you.
Yes. Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that, Alex. That was great. You got an applause at the end and lots of laughter throughout, as well as some philosophical moments, I'm sure. Does anybody want to share any of their names? Yeah?
I do. Ollie Onions with a Z.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I'm just gonna read a quick poem to kind of open the space before moving on to panel one. This is by Seni Tembaratni, and it's called Philomela Nest Building. So Bianca suggested it'd be a good one whilst we're building this nest here together. I gave up on humanity, booked for succor in the language of birds, in their comings and goings to a nest in the trees. I watched how they gathered, the smallest things, how their weaving made circles. I began to see how one stem fit with another, each fibre a memory in its proper place. And this damaged self learned how to build, learned the uses of the beak. I was a creature among creatures, beginning to know the stillness of forest ways. No judgment, no shame, and water like a sanctuary. It was always running, always knew where it was going. I gathered birchwood branches, like time in no particular order, from the chaos of fire, tied each one piece by piece. It took patience. This easing, curved back, this tying and retying over and over is how I love myself again. Reordering the tricks of time, conjuring survival. All right, so panel one then is vegan. Activism and identities. And first up, we've got Norman Riley. Is Norman with us online now? Great. So we're going to make you co-host, Norman, and if you could share your screen with us, then we can, we can see what's cracking. Thank you.
Right now we do.
Can I start talking? Shall I start talking?
Yes, it's all good.
All right, sorry, I've just stood. Yeah, sorry. I'll crack on then. Morning, everyone. Delighted to be given this opportunity to talk at the Centre for Human Animal Studies Symposium. I'm Norman Riley, a Year 2 doctoral researcher in the Department of Sociology at the University of Essex. I wish I could be there in person today because, to be honest with you, I love the city of Liverpool. You might have noticed a very subtle nod to that in the title of my talk. I've been vegan for over a decade, and I had me, I guess you'd call it me vegan epiphany when I was living in a country where meat plays a really big role in diet and social bonding in the economy. I'd regularly be invited over for barbecues, which of course meant gorging on what are called pork and beef. However, after a while, and I genuinely don't know what the trigger moment was, I started thinking about the amount of meat I saw, and I asked myself, how many pigs and cows are being killed for this daily? And once I looked it up, I struggled to comprehend the scale of it. I started noticing cows when driving out to the coast or mountains at the weekend. I started to see the big grey buildings located a little way back from the road behind these peaceful scenes. I started to put two and two together. Of course, that's where the goat got killed. I looked into how cows were killed. I opened that door. I looked into how pigs were farmed and killed. I started opening more and more doors. I didn't want to be part of all this death and misery, so I became vegan. I dived in deeply very quickly. I just got to work out how to change my slides. There we are. I dived in deeply very quickly, and I suppose, my veganism, it soon became political, and I guess I now consider myself, what I call an ethical political vegan, which I define as the acceptance that it's morally wrong to exploit any sentient being. It's the belief that all sentient beings have the right to lives free from human harm. It's the imagination of a world free of speciesism. It's a striving for justice and happiness for all humans and their non-human relations. It is freedom, dreaming, channeling Robin D.J. Kelly there. I entered higher education in my early 40s, and veganism is ultimately what led us to do a PhD. And as my identity as an ethical political vegan suggests, I see veganism as a striving for a truly liberated world. It's an aspirational total liberation standpoint. However, engaging with research into veganism through my master's studies showed us that an issue with such an assumption is that the vegan movement, if we can call it that, isn't necessarily a space where everyone is, necessarily pro-liberation or everyone's welcome. Veganism's been accused of being exclusionary. It's been argued that mainstream vegan movements out to touch of people from opportunity-deprived communities by catering only to the financially secure, highly educated, in the academic attainment sense, and politically liberal. And as a working-class vegan, such arguments, for want of a better description, made us feel kind of both angry and depressed. But in all honesty, in 12 years of being vegan, I have in person met and become friends with only one other vegan whose social class background intersects with my own. Even then, while sharing similar impoverished upbringings, we both ended up with degrees and we're both now doing PhDs. And arguably, they can no longer be considered working class, even if we identify as such. The question I ask is, would veganism have crossed my radar in any resonating way if I'd remained on the gated council estate where I was born, raised and socialised in early adulthood? I doubt it. And my pre-fieldwork hunches suggested several reasons why this might be the case. These reasons, which I suppose we could call barriers, include the stigma associated with veganism, how it's portrayed by the media, and ideas around meat and masculinity, just to name a few. I won't go deeply into them as I've only a short amount of time. So obviously I'm happy to take questions on them should anyone have any, but to be honest, I reckon most of you are probably already familiar with them. However, I started to see these hunches as being a little contrived because of what I'd already studied. I started asking myself if I was being judgmental. I asked myself whether research was actually speaking with people in communities such as the one that I'm from. I asked myself, do I want to disprove these hunches and question whether previous findings are applicable to a community like mine? For example, the idea that certain people are uninterested in veganism because they don't fit the essentialized profile of a vegan, is politically liberal, university educated, and financially solvent, echoes the dismissal of Black, Indigenous, and people of colour vegans in the USA from the mainstream vegan discourses. For example, Black, Indigenous, and people of colour households have less median wealth than whites, yet are more likely to be vegan. Black Americans are almost 3 times likely to be vegan and vegetarian than white. And looking at research into why that might be the case, they argue that in contrast to being a practice which perpetuates the oppression of human and non-human animal bodies, caught the logic of capitalism, the radical veganism of Black, Indigenous, and people of colour challenges the extractivism, exploitation, inequality, institutional racism, and speciesism fundamental to its survival. The perceived healthiness of vegan diets is a motivating factor among Black, Indigenous, and people of colour vegans who take it up as a means of counteracting the health problems disproportionately affecting communities of colour. And such diet-related health problems are driven by institutionally racist governments in tandem with the food industrial complex as a means of ensuring their continued oppression. Black and Indigenous communities are intentionally saturated with food outlets offering little more than unhealthy fare and are situated in so-called food deserts where access to healthy and affordable foods is limited. Research from the University of Connecticut last year found that US food companies disproportionately target Black and Hispanic consumers for high-calorie, low-nutrient products including candy, sugary drinks, snacks, and fast food. But I think still cool. It isn't food access that's the issue, but systemically racist policies and decision-making intentionally perpetuating food apartheid as a means of reinforcing white supremacy. And the veganism of Black, Indigenous, and people of colour can be seen as a means of resisting the structural perpetuation of race and class-based food oppression, and as a means of decolonising the body from the colonial diet killing the Black community. By looking at the veganism of Black, Indigenous, and people of colour, I'm not, of course, comparing their experiences and those of a working-class community in the UK and a working-class community that's overwhelmingly white. However, what I'm interested in is whether veganism can, like in the USA, among Black, Indigenous, and people of colour communities, offer a means of combating the issues associated with discriminatory food waste, impacting people from low-income backgrounds here in the UK. I'm inspired by what I see in the US. And the utopian idea is that if the messaging is constructed in a way that resonates, a vegan movement can grow within such communities. That it'll be a movement built on solidarity with humans and non-human animals, exploited and oppressed by industrial animal agriculture. I may end up bitterly disappointed, but I have to give it a go. I also wanted to understand the idea of meat and masculinity and its relevance. The question I asked was, is this really a thing now? Based on my own experiences when I was younger and working as a builder and then a drayman with somebody who delivers beer, in the early to late 90s, I did get abuse for what back then was my vegetarianism. I can though say hand on heart that in 12 odd years of being vegan, I've not had any issues with being seen as less of a, air quotes, real man, whatever that means, from friends and family engaged in manual work. I mean, I've got no idea what to say about this when we back, of course. These arguments around working class men being some kind of Neanderthals who think that we'll have to consume animal flesh to be proper men began to irritate us and started to feel a little bit, dare I say, classist. And there's been no research, as far as I can see, exploring ideas around veganism and more relationships with non-human animals in an English working class community. So this is what I'm doing. And what I've done so far is carry out 5 focus groups and 27 individual interviews. All I guess I could say is semi-structured, but some of the tangents have been wild. The structures certainly come crumbling down on a few occasions. And most of my recruiting was done through the community centre on the estate that I'm from. And I've spoken to roughly a sort of 60 to 40 male split in ages of range between 19 to 85. And in terms of observations so far, and these are all initial, obviously, by the way, as I've only just finished collecting and I'm yet to dive into full analysis. What struck us is the seeming lack of association between veganism and masculinity. A couple of interviewees mentioned they couldn't go vegan because they needed bulk protein as they were bodybuilders. However, this doesn't seem to come from a place of thinking of veganism as being bad for one's health or emasculating. It's more, I'd argue, that there's a lack of knowledge around where protein can be gotten. And this myth around veganism and protein is deeply embedded. People just assume that veganism entails insufficient protein, or at least not enough to get big, and that we need to consume the flesh of non-human animals to do so. I mean, you could, of course, obviously argue the desire to get big is a kind of form of adherence to hegemonic masculinity. I may tap into that later on in my research. However, getting into discussions around whether meat and dairy were necessary to so-called manliness, with questions constructed in a way to try and draw people's thoughts on what must be eaten to make one physically strong, seem to reveal that men don't think that being vegans congruent with being feeble, weak, or less than a real man. Again, whatever the heck that entails. This kind of contradicts much of the research. You know, again, I might find there's a lot more when I dig deeper into the data, but right now I'm wondering whether there's an insight into a new type of working class masculinity. The myth that men need meat is perhaps being challenged in these potentially new attitudes to what one must consume to be a real man, or indeed what a real man is, suggests that a vegan man might not be stigmatized. And I'm reminded of Stephen Roberts' 2019 research on working class men in the southeast of England. Roberts draws on Eric Anderson's inclusive masculinity theory to counter dominant narratives surrounding working class masculinity. Dominant narratives prevalent in the academic literature and popular media continue to portray working class masculinity as homophobic, misogynistic, suspicious of anything connoting femininity, and adherent to breadwinner ideals. However, Roberts' work highlights the potential for them to challenge hegemonic norms and foster more egalitarian ways of living. Roberts' findings suggest that working class men could play a positive and influential role in mainstreaming of vegan living, rather than being one of the greatest barriers to it, as the current literature suggests. One area I will need to consider, though, is my positionality. Participants were on the whole away me veganism early on in interviews because, to be honest with you, most of the masters if I was. And in respect to male participants, you know, I question, was there like a concern between veganism and the concepts of masculinity performed because of me? I'm quite stocky, I'm heavily tattooed, and for want of a better word, a kind of rough looking Geordie, and perhaps throw people a bit. My supervisor asked us to consider whether certain conversations would have played out similarly if she'd been the interviewer, being female and, however we might frame it, well spoken and, you know, from the south. I'd be interested in others' thoughts on this. So one of the areas I wanted to look at was what level of understanding there might be around the links between the animal industrial complex and climate change. You know, I'm sure most of us know the arguments about how much greenhouse gases it produces, links to deforestation, biodiversity loss, pollution of waterways, and et cetera, et cetera. The bulk of participants profess to having zero to minimal knowledge of the impacts of the animal industrial complex, animal agriculture on the environment. A few mentioned connections between, what we call beef and climate change, but even trying to dig into this, I didn't get much beyond 5 from 50-odd participants mentioning briefly engaging with these arguments through TV, or in the case of a couple of people from watching Cowspiracy, and that documentary didn't lead them to change their eating habits, by the way. Messages like those put up by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or vegan and environmental charities are, on the surface, it seems, simply not resonating or getting through. In terms of where people get their news, social media like TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook featured heavily, and with content on such platforms being algorithm-driven, it's maybe unsurprising if you're not actively seeking out these kind of stories and you're not getting them. Recent research also suggests that only 7% of mainstream media climate stories in the US mention links between animal agriculture and climate degradation. It'd be interesting to find out if such a low percentage is reflected in the UK. Furthermore, most participants seemed unaware of the violence inflicted on commodified non-human animals. Some mention the UK's high welfare standards, high in air quotes there, and again in air quotes, humane treatment and slaughter of non-human animals as evidence that those we consume aren't mistreated. Of course, there exists the possibility that participants genuinely have little to no idea of how commodified non-human animals are treated and killed, nor indeed how those humans employed to do the dirty work of imprisoning, forcibly breeding, torturing, and killing them are themselves exploited by the animal industrial complexes and network capitalistic mode of operating. However, a deeper analysis of the data has the potential to reveal whether this lack of knowledge is evidence of participants employing a form of what Lindsay Mahoy calls strategic ignorance. That a life has been taken in order for someone to eat meat cannot be denied by any participant. Thus, although some profess to not caring about the treatment of non-human animals and their killing, some insisted that then sure the non-human animal they consume has been treated humanely prior to the killing, or during her time producing milk or laying eggs. For example, participants mentioned buying meat that's Red Tractor approved, or free-range eggs, or RSPCA approved dairy. And even participants who weren't aware of so-called welfare labels mentioned UK welfare laws, which are in place to ensure that, again, air quotes, humane treatment and slaughter of commodified non-human animals. The idea that most non-human animals have nice lives before being killed seems to linger. However, a hunch I need to explore here when I dig deep into the data is whether such justifications are deliberately employed as a means of people insulating themselves from the unsettling reality. The question I'm toying with is, does believing that non-human animals they consume are treated humanely because the government, lawmakers, farmers, and a well-known animal charity say so, allow consumers to strategically ignore the evidence showing the suffering inflicted on them? Adherence to the claims produced by such authorities to rationalise and justify the consumption of non-human animals chimes with the use of knowledge alibis, which Mahoy defines as the ability to defend one's ignorance by mobilising the ignorance of higher-placed experts. I further posit that the application of knowledge alibis might be evident in arguments made by several participants who are familiar with vegan arguments around the environment. These participants use what are kind of half-jokingly, half-seriously called the almonds and avocados reproach. A regular counter-argument I found in a content analysis of UK newspaper portrayals of veganism to those advocating for it based on environmental principles is that the growing of almonds and avocados, food which have been portrayed as quintessentially vegan, have a detrimental impact on the environment. This is based on the relatively high amount of water required to cultivate them, as well as their growing popularity leading to monocropping and deforestation. Furthermore, some argue that avocados aren't vegan because their growth, due to increasing demand, requires unnatural pollination, that is, bees that are in effect farmed and transported to pollinate. However, such an argument itself relies on a form of strategic ignorance in its conceptualization. The position of vegans as being the only people who consume foods like avocados and almonds is, of course, wildly inaccurate. It claims that it's vegans and vegans alone who are responsible for the growing demand for such foods have no empirical basis. Furthermore, the environmental impacts of growing the two crops, while higher than many other crops, are significantly less than those of non-human animal products, even when factoring in the transportation from one side of the world to the other. Moreover, in respect to the bees required to pollinate avocado trees, veganism is defined by the Vegan Society as a way of living which seeks to exclude, and this is the important part, right, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. Due to the current global food system, dominated as it is by just 10 companies, excluding products because they might rely on pollination by bees bred for commercial purposes would mean vegans not eating beans, tomatoes, apples, broccoli, melons, carrots, onions, and many other fruits, vegetables, and grains. Thus, I'd argue to attempt to denigrate or admonish veganism through the use of the avocados and almonds reproach, which doesn't just need to be about almonds and avocados, of course, soy is one that springs to mind straight away, is a form of strategic ignorance based on the employment of inaccurate arguments subjectively formulated by knowledge alibis. I'll be honest though, I'm concerned I might have already taught myself into thinking the B levels of strategic ignorance at play before I even started interviewing. I'm now asking myself whether framing such positions as ignorant is problematic and, to be honest, too much due to my own subjectivities as an ethical political vegan. I'm worried I might be looking in to conclude that people are intentionally ignoring the violent consumption of consuming non-human animals in order to address my own frustrations. And, as awful as this is to grapple with, to reinforce my sense of superiority and self-righteousness, I stand back sometimes and ask myself, who the F am I to say this? Despite its criticisms, Joy's carnism has also been bouncing around in my mind through initial observation of the data. Joy's idea around my socialisation into accepting the consumption of non-human animals as normal, natural and necessary does resonate. You could add the fourth N of niceness given by Piazza told in 2015. So, the four N's theory, I guess we might call it, it's being called now. And when I hear participants describe what they remember of food from childhood and how they've consumed throughout their lives, there does seem to be minimal critical engagement with what lies behind their choices. The carnist idea that we consume animals because it's just what we do, and therefore we don't need to think about it, kind of could help us understand why people have never listened to and or contemplated arguments around dietary and consumption changes. The questions I need to explore here are how we're so indifferent to what we put in our bodies, how we're so indifferent to the plight of the non-human animals we consume, why and how do we move through life consuming non-human animals because it's convenient and nice, without thinking what that convenience and niceness entails, and without wondering, are there alternatives out there equally as convenient and nice that don't involve all the horrors associated with what we do to non-human animals? So looking forward, I've obviously got all the data to work through, and no doubts, everything I'm thinking, and I've said so far, apologies, does sound a bit random and disjointed. However, early thoughts are that if activism is to have any effect in a community such as the one I'm from, it needs to be a boots on the ground approach that offers people the opportunity to engage with veganism in a way where they feel they're not being judged. Organisations using stark images of animal mistreatment in advertising campaigns, campaigns like Veganuary, climate messages, basically anything we might sort of call this top-down publicity that doesn't seem to be resonating, at least among the people who have spoken. I've been asked to go to the community centre to put on a vegan day, cooking a meal and engaging in conversation on why I'm vegan and why others might be. It'll be interesting to see what kind of reaction this brings. I think introducing people through a community base rather than onus on the individual approach to what goes on in industrial animal agriculture could be vital. I've seen genuine sympathy for non-human animals when I've asked people to sit back and reflect on what happens to the animals we consume. There've been actual tears from a few people. And tapping into this without coming across as hostile, even if what we're doing isn't hostile to us, because it's just the truth, right? I think could be the key in getting people to engage with the idea of veganism. My hope is that what I produce could contribute to inspire a working class veganism based on community and solidarity. A utopian idea for sure, but then what is our veganism if not a striving for a utopian future? Thank you.
That was fantastic. Can you hear me okay?
I love that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Norman. We'll have a question at the end of the panels, but also if anyone's got any questions for Norman, just jot them down. Right. Next up, we've got Louis Go, undermining anthropocentrism through vegan discourse. In person, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
Do I need to use my question? Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Louis Goff, and I'm in my final year of my PhD at the University of the West of England, which is Bristol. My partner and I travelled from Bristol down yesterday. So the title of my talk is Undermining Anthropocentrism and Vegan Discourse, which hopefully will give a brief indication of my research interests. So central to my PhD research is the notion of centrism, obviously, which has been identified by Luke Nassi, a belief system by and through which humans are understood as separate and superior to other living and unliving. Matthew Clarko breaks anthropocentrism down into conceptual characteristics, which are human exceptionalism and human narcissism, or an incessant attention to and rotation around exclusively human interests and existence, a binary human-animal ontology, which is to say a reductive the second characteristic is So second conceptual characteristic is a binary human-animal ontology, which is to say a reductive binary distinction between humans and non-human animals, in which the latter is perceived as forever lacking, and a corresponding human supremacist moral hierarchy.
Sorry. Just need to share the screen so people can see where you are. Okay, sorry.
Cool. So three characteristics, human exceptionalism, binary human-animal ontology, and then a human supremacist moral hierarchy. So Clarko also underscores two practical characteristics of anthropocentrism, which he labels subhuman zones of exclusion, or the exclusion of all humans alongside non-humans who ostensibly fall short of the quintessentially human, and institutional effects, which means the robust, interlocking, complex series of practices and institutions that serve to establish, reproduce, and maintain that anthropocentric form of life. So I discussed these characteristics to a range of scholars and concepts, not least the human-animal dualism, in order to present anthropocentrism as the root of the mass subordination, exploitation, and oppression of non-human animals and their environments, as well as the foundational ideology undergirding the historic and ongoing intra-human oppressions of all those who do not fit within the colonial, European, white, cis-male, heterosexual, neurotypical, able-bodied, property-owning, etc. model of the human, the capital H. So, the practice and philosophy of veganism, on the other hand, has been understood by many, myself included, as indispensable to anti-anthropocentric efforts. In contrast with the discriminatory narcissism of anthropocentrism, veganism has the potential to be a wholly other-directed movement, standing in direct opposition to the speciesist foundations of interconnected non-human and human oppressions in Western capitalist societies. Unsurprisingly, however, not all manifestations of veganism and vegan advocacy reach this radical potential. My research is an attempt to examine the mainstream's capacity in this connection. So, through a critical discourse analysis of the online advocacy materials of 12 vegan organizations and 5 vegan activists, chosen due to their online prominence, my research responds to the following research question. How and to what extent is anthropocentrism subverted and or reinforced by the online advocacy discourse of vegan organizations and activists within the mainstream contemporary vegan movement? So just briefly, my focus on discourse is motivated by a Foucauldian belief in the power of discourse, the idea that discourse determines the boundaries of rational thoughts, opinions, and behaviors. So far from being a neutral conveyor of truth, discourse is deeply ideological, containing and perpetuating power inequalities. As Adams elucidates, our euphemistic language, which renders non-human animals absent reference, constitutes the discursive violence that allows for a material form of violence to take place. Resultantly, changing culture is centrally a matter of changing language, argues Fairclough. But we cannot eradicate speciesism if we continue to tolerate it in the very words we speak, asserts Nguyen. So I'm currently at the write-up stage of my PhD, having collected and thematically analysed all my data, and I can honestly say that one of the biggest lessons that I've learned during this bizarre process of doing a PhD is collect less data. Anyway, for a paper that I'm hoping to publish, I took a sample of my data, that which corresponds to the online advocacy discourse of just 3 key mainstream organisations. They are the Vegan Society, PETA, and Viva. I structured my findings and discussion for this article around the 3 conceptual characteristics of anthropocentrism I mentioned earlier, of which here I only discuss one, alongside considerations regarding the intersectional potential of these organisations' advocacy discourse. So I'm just talking about a little sample of my PhD. Regarding human narcissism, I found that the organisation's anti-anthropocentric potential lay most obviously in their non-human animal-centred definitions of veganism, a personal favourite being PETA's, vegan, the radical idea that animals' body parts are their own. I argued that said definitions undercut human-centredness and refuse the reduction of other animals to mere factories for human interests. They are mothers, not machines, Viva affirmed. Further, this use of a relational noun, mothers, to describe non-human animals foregrounds their potential lives beyond being raw materials for human consumption. In my view, the most radical challenge to human narcissism was offered by PETA in their assertion that when endeavouring to uphold the rights of individual animals, the best option in most cases is simply leaving them alone. In my favourite book of all time, Patricia McCormack presents leaving alone as an active passivity that avoids imposing anthropocentrism on the non-consenting other, an activism of care that seems unthinkable to the human exceptionalism of the West. So this characteristic of anthropocentrism, human narcissism, was reinforced most obviously through the centering of human interests. In this connection, organisations foregrounded the personal health benefits of veganism and the links between animal products, consumption, and human health risks. Epitomising this was Viva's repeated tagline, "End factory farming before it ends us." The us, as far as I can tell, referring to us as humans. This sort of framing can be best described using Freeman's term, anthropocentric altruism, which in my PhD I talk a lot about how that's not on its own a bad thing, of course, but it's also kind of limited. Frustratingly, wildlife at points was presented primarily as the foundation of humanity's survival, as opposed to myriad life with beyond human interest, intrinsic value. Whilst the direct victims of non-human products, non-vegan products were further overlooked by messages such as buy a burger, kill a toucan, and save the whales, don't eat fish. Here I draw on Eva Juro to argue that redirecting attention away from the direct victims of animal products onto more charismatic forms of suffering, from a human perspective of course, exposes an anthropocentric logic. Ethically driven messages also reinforce human narcissism via the framing of veganism around human love for non-human animals, thus rendering moral consideration contingent on self-indulgent human commerce, an unstable foundation for ethics at best, in my view. Also, a paternalism and human saviorism which presents non-human animals as infantilized tokens to whom we generously offer our protection, whilst leaving our sense of human exceptionalism intact, to use Quinn's words. And also, finally, an emphasis on non-human capabilities, which perpetuates the very same benchmarks to moral consideration that undergird the historic and ongoing oppression of non-human animals and colonized and minoritized human groups in the first place. So, skipping over the other characteristics of anthropocentrism in the interest of time, I will now briefly focus on my findings pertaining to intersectional potential. So, importantly, my focus on intra-human oppressions is not a distraction from black animals, but rather, following Coe and Co., among others, a recognition that colonial and anthropocentric human-animal dualism, which animalizes both non-human animals and otherized humans, is the common source of human and non-human oppressions, which must therefore be thought about together. The organizations encouraged intersectional awareness through their presenting of veganism as part of a broader struggle part of a broader and entwined struggle against the manifold manifestations of oppression, not least the exploitation of human workers within the animal industrial complex, and the unequally distributed health and environmental consequences of said industry. Unfortunately, however, the organisations fell short of this potential when presenting veganism as actually a piece of cake, to quote the Vegan Society, overlooking the experiences of marginalised communities living in food deserts, or by commodifying veganism through an overemphasis on consumerism, thereby blunting the movement's capacity to problematise the injustices of capitalism and foreground the plight of those exploited within it. As Torres writes, this brand of veganism will never be able to make real connections with other movements or forms of oppression. Veganism, or the perpetuation of hegemonic masculinity through veganism, was also apparent in some of the organisation's messaging. Epitomising this was Viva's workout collection, which included skin-tight gym clothing on which bold, brave, active vegan was printed. Following Greenbaum and Dexter, I argue that said messaging plays into patriarchal gender ideals and thus does little to challenge them. Finally, the organisations also adopted discriminatory single-issue focuses, specifically targeting, for example, halal slaughter or so-called useless Chinese medicines, which in turn promoted a colonial white saviour narrative in which non-Western practices were presented as particularly barbaric. And also insensitive comparisons between oppressions, most notably by Peter, whose use of this strategy is well documented, which both overlooks the ongoing reality of and exploits human oppression. As argued by Brooke, said framings contribute to the commonplace perception of veganism as solely a movement for privileged white communities, and in turn perpetuates the anthropocentric centering of the quintessential human, the privileged white male consumerist. So hopefully this simplified snippet of my PhD has provided some indication as to the nature of my work. A common response I get when discussing this research, not least from my partner Heidi, who's sitting over there, relates to what Freeman describes as the classic communication dilemma of ideological authenticity versus pragmatically meeting people where they are to social movement advocacy. This is a central tension in my PhD. Ultimately, I agree with Trigg, who underscores the importance of articulating the ideal picture before considering the non-ideal steps towards it. My hope is that my research will facilitate the future production of vegan campaigns that reach their anti-anthropocentric potential and in turn play their part in our fight against all inextricably linked manifestations of oppression and exploitation. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think, as many of you are aware, I think the standpoint of my research is kind of this idea of consumption and use of human animal products is kind of contributing to multiple crises. Obviously, we talk about the kind of climate crisis of non-human animal exploitation, and maybe kind of the less talked about one is also the crisis of exploitation of working class and migrant labour, particularly within the meat and animal industries. They're often working in poor conditions for low pay. And the second sort of premise of my research is the way in which we kind of consume and kind of relate to non-human animals, both in our consumption of meat and other ways, is kind of interrelated to meat and masculinity. So not only do men on average consume significantly higher amounts of animal products, this has also been linked to particular forms of masculine norms and masculine gender performances. So just to kind of take that a little bit beyond just purely thinking about the kind of the meat and masculinity connection, we talk about how from a young age, boys are taught that caring for animals is odd, queer, and effeminate. And longitudinal studies like Liechtenstein showed that like young boys often kind of trained and kind of fought and kind of ridiculed by their peers in a way that kind of means that they kind of don't develop these kind of strong and passionate relationships and loving relationships with non-human animals. And so some of the manifestations of this in later life is men are significantly more likely to be involved in the illegal animal fighting or violence against animals. And ecofeminists such as Carol Adams suggested that and have found evidence that male violence against animals, for example, companion animals within the home, is often a precursor for violence, domestic violence against women or children or other people in the home. From a theoretical perspective, theorists such as Adams introduced terms like the absent referent. So you can see in the way some of these images here how the women's bodies are perhaps labeled as pieces of meat, in which kind of reinforces subordination of women and the objectification of women. Also in the ways in which a non-human animal is labeled as pork or beef, also kind of absent referent. So the animal themselves is lost in this discourse and they become purely seen as meat. So another way in which kind of masculinity and kind of lack of environmental concern and perhaps also again lack of concern for the some of the vegan values, this idea of masculinity linked with colonialism, which has gained particular traction as a right-wing shift in politics has happened in recent years. This is reflected in figures such as Donald Trump. Another example might be the recent Greta Thunberg and Andy Cates spat, where their misogyny and their kind of right-wing politics is clearly tied in with a kind of anti-environmentalism and a rejection of kind of environmental values. And sort of we can argue that meat eating and the consumption of animal products also tied in this narrative. Trump's had his own range of steaks. He served McDonald's to professional football players in the White House and often pictured eating red meat and particular forms of fast food. And the kind of impact of this is that kind of men are statistically less likely to believe in the impact of climate change, and this has been shown in the US and Norway when it controls other factors. So yeah, just to quickly touch on the theory, we can talk about hegemonic masculinity from theories like Rare and Connell, put pressure on men to reform masculinity in one particular way, and other forms of masculinity and other men often become marginalized or subordinated. So I use this flag because my wife cares about the environment. Almost the idea that, and this is a real bag and this is a real product, that men can't kind of own up to be involved and wanting the environment themselves, and they kind of have to find ways to kind of deflect and justify that to kind of fit in with their masculinity. And however, another way in which this has an impact is that the significant majority of climate justice, animal rights, and animal activists across different countries and across different decades have been led by women and people of other genders, and men have been significantly less likely to get involved in these causes. And again, various studies have shown that, for example, environmental justice activism in the US, men don't want to get involved because they see it as upsetting the status quo, and they want to remain within the all boys club, especially within kind of like local communities. I think it's also important to touch on the fact that when we talk about hegemonic masculinity and the ways it may negatively impact non-human animals and the ways it not impact different genders, this is all having a significant negative impact on men themselves. For example, high consumption of red meat and other factors in significant worse diets, as well as less likely to seek professional help when suffering from mental health issues. That means men have significantly lower life expectancies than women. And things like the rate of suicide are also higher among men. And studies have again linked this to particular forms of masculinity, prevented men from talking about their emotions and kind of expressing their emotions and kind of maybe challenging certain practices. Now, interesting to me to kind of flip that environmental argument about men don't care about the environment. When we talk about the professional sphere, we can see that men continue to dominate the political elite and are kind of leading the way in making environmental decisions. So Sharon and McGregor and other theorists have called this a masculinization of environmental, where essentially kind of gender and intersection justice kind of approaches environmentalism kind of sidelines, and tackling, say, climate change or tackling the impact of animal agriculture gets reduced to a technical problem that can be solved with technical fixes, often speculative new technologies that are untested and untried, but these are seen as the way to solve these problems, despite the fact there's no evidence of success. So again, just a picture to illustrate the recent delegates from the recent COP27, nearly all men, and again, we can see that the outcome of that COP was essentially no real commitment to tackling the root cause of climate change. So the question that kind of emerges with this, what can we do to bring about change? So some theorists, such as Tolman and Pewley, argued that they need to foster a more ecological form of masculinity that has greater care for self, others, the earth, and it's about great collaborative rather than abusive relationships with non-human others, and humans, so essentially challenging this kind of currently hegemonic forms of masculinity. And a underrepresented but slowly growing body of research began to argue that vegan, in the way in which they kind of exist in tension with societal ideas around both masculinity and human animal relations, are potentially one sort of pathway, one group that we can look at in terms of, what does a less kind of hegemonic and more perhaps ecological form of masculinity look like, and what kind of led those men to kind of reach those conclusions. What lessons can we learn from that? Of course, I don't want to kind of present a simplistic narrative, as kind of already mentioned today. Things like veganism, Catherine Oliver used this idea of redemption narratives. Some vegan men talk about how they've overcome adversity in their past, they've sort of redeemed themselves through their veganism. And that's allowed them to become stronger and better and good, strong men. And then they kind of influence others, sampling in kind of like social media platforms. The Game Changers documentary, again, being a good example of that kind of vegan or kind of more masculine veganism represented in kind of mainstream discourses. So I'm currently at the proposal ethics kind of stage of my research, going ethics approval. And what I want to do essentially investigate whether vegan activists men for alternative understanding of masculinity and also specifically whether vegan activist organizations, in the way that they're structured, the approaches that they adopt, whether they help men adopt these forms of masculinity and gender performance. And so I want to do this for an explanation of the gender power dynamics within vegan activist organizations in the UK. However, again, I don't want to present a simplistic narrative, particularly in the wake of the Me Too movement, various instances of sexual harassment, of misconduct, and also just kind of everyday kind of acts of sexism were kind of discussed and revealed within the animal movement, especially within the kind of large American organizations. But also there was also evidence found within the grassroots movement, and Gorski found that when they interviewed women, one of the major reasons they said they'd left the animal activist movement was because of sexism that they had experienced. So I want to kind of investigate these kind of organizations, see what sort of gender dynamics exist, and see what we can kind of learn from them. In order to do this, I essentially want to conduct in-depth life history interviews with vegan activists who identify as men. But to prevent kind of a one-sided narrative, I also want to conduct further narrative interviews of activists of all different genders. So women within these vegan activist spaces, what are their experiences in that spaces? How do we perhaps compare or contrast with vegan activist men? And what can we learn from that? And I want to kind of draw from sort of my own reflections and sort of my own identity within that research as well. Yeah, so essentially, going through the ecological masculinities, currently there's not a lot of research within that field. It's really focusing on vegan identities, even though it seems to be on ecological areas. I want to kind of develop and expand that. And also, often these kind of studies that have looked at gender and intersectional issues within animal activist organizations through the largely US focus. There hasn't really been much doing that in the UK. So I want to kind of bring some of that research into like the UK environment. So just to quickly conclude, I'm still yet to complete my research, so it's more of a questions than a kind of solid conclusions. Essentially, vegan activists offer alternatives to current masculine hegemony. And what, if any at all, role can vegan activist organizations play in kind of fostering these alternative gender?
Great. See people like jotting down notes for their research as you go along. It's fantastic. Thank you, Cam. Okay, so this is the last one of this panel, session 1 on vegan activism and identities. And this will be Natalie Joel, over in the Militant Vegan magazine. So Bianca's just making you co-host, Natalie. If you could share your screen, it'd be fantastic.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. My name's Natalie Joel. My pronouns are she, her. And the title of my talk today is The Militant Vegan. The Militant Vegan is a mid-90s underground zine with ongoing international influence. Founded to redress media blackout in the US on direct action on behalf of enslaved animals, its pages document actions of economic sabotage against animal exploitation, with an emphasis on those claimed under Animal Liberation Front guidelines. The anonymous editors note their commitment to a lifetime of work to free innocent animals and restore natural biodiversity and ecological balance. The zine offers, for informational purposes only, as the disclaimer has it, a repository of activist tactics, communicated journalistically through press cuttings, didactic graphic narratives, and visually within the page layout, where official stories are hand annotated, adding records of animals as comrades enacting resistance in collaboration with activists, such as the silence of dogs in security roles. There's joy in the reading of mainstream news and industry publications against the grain, with slant text that notes that, quote, the shitty trade journal is always a laugh. The zine also co-opts the convention of the public enemy poster, calling out animal industry's lawful business as usual. Its features, including an open letter from Rod Coronado, convincingly complicate the rule of law. I quote, at a time when ecological and cultural destruction is commonplace within the perimeter of the law, it sometimes becomes necessary to adhere to the highest laws of nature and morality, rather than stand mute witness to the destruction of our land and people. In a recent corpus-based study of representations of vegans in the British broadsheet and tabloid press, titled Militant, Annoying and Sexy, it was the word militant that was the highest ranking and strongest modifier colloquet of vegans, including the senses of extreme, exceptional, and violent. Journalistic coverage over the last couple of months has seen actions by Animal Rising dubbed militant vegans by the British popular press. For some contemporary activists like Alex Lockwood, who kicked us off so brilliantly this morning, the use of the word militant is a harmful slur that belies what proportionate action adequate to the scale of anthropogenic animal suffering escalated to multi-species existential threat might look like. The pages of the Militant Vegan echo that it's a tactic to portray us as extreme and not the expectation of exploitation towards extinction and ecocide. For others like Maxwell Schörner, proportionate action is adequately described by the term militant, as militant activists operate in a cultural space with popular ideas about what is important. The editors of the Militant Vegan write, when we started, a militant vegan was unheard of, but now radical veganism is the driving force behind all the new energy out there. They note, every militant animal rights activist is representative of the entire movement. It's up to us whether our movement is a hateful, alienating, arrogant one, or an open-minded, caring, articulate, impressive one. Ensuring the latter over the former does not make one less radical. It is nothing less than an important tactic on the path to equality-free society. Today, revisiting the militant vegan may be a timely counterpoint to contemporary attempts to distance veganism from eco-political militancy through plant-based capitalism, re-emphasizing the role of veganism as left praxis and an active political refusal, in the words of Jonathan Dickstein and others, quote, an effective tactic to erode at least one systemic manifestation of animal exploitation. For the billions of animals killed each year, the ecosystems destroyed to make room for farms and feed crops, and the people displaced or made to labor in the animal industrial complex. The high circulation of the phrase and idea of the militant vegan may be helpfully radicalizing by being so readily available for vegans to orient ourselves in relation to. Perhaps there's something about the phrase the militant vegan, as it is variously culturally celebrated, deferred, demurred, dismissed as a danger, or considered as a contradiction in its combative non-violence, which perhaps by remaining stickily unstable and enigmatically in process, itself enacts its own form of vegan anti-capitalist resistance. Let the phrase, the militant vegan, brick open the brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. Let the phrase, the militant vegan, enable us to act as if our house is on fire from an arson attack by animal industry. And let the phrase, the militant vegan, bring peace. This creative presentation of work forthcoming in the Militant Ecologies issues of Green Letters offers a playful index of the militant vegan, which takes the form of a collage that recirculates its radical print culture, articulating an alphabet of ecotage to counter the sufferings of animal exploitation and its ecocide. R N equals in Kens to utter and the each for the militant vegan revolution. Over the last 400 years, industry has waged a genocidal war against animals and humans. As long as there are slaughterhouses, there will be battlefields. Animal abuse industries, anonymous billboard burn, paint bomb, compassionate destroy the property of those who kill for profit, destroy that which destroys the animals, earth, and ourselves. Eliminate this anthropocentric, profit-centered beast before the last howl etched with acid. Free, fight, fire with fire. Glue, locks. Hit, intervene. Some ideas for aggressive economic attack tactics. Just spread your love. Call some fair business, 800 numbers. Keep them on the phone. Tying up their phone line. Running up their bills. Preventing legitimate business calls from being answered. And wasting their time. The longer you talk, the more they pay. If considered terrorists due to our prioritizing of life over profit and property, then accept that label with pride. Liberate lean pork. Meat is murder. Maybe we can cut non-violence by any means necessary. Paint panthers, spatter, matter. In all of your monkey-wrenching endeavors, do not be afraid to constantly experiment, improvise, and practice your techniques. Monkey wrenching is a highly creative field. We must join hands with others fighting for their own liberation. Activists from all races and all economic and social backgrounds, vegans who stand against all forms of oppression and injustice. If not you, then who? If not now, when? Reply no comment or I do not wish to say anything and stick to prisoner. I have not forgotten those already behind bars, questioning, resistance rescuing, sabbing, tires slashed, the usual smashing, broken windows delivered by our fast and efficient bricking service, to be continued until the last farm is ground. No to tyranny, mutilated to the factory farm system. Victories, vegan vandals, sabotage wailing, stereotype of the militant extremist, said had been contaminated, none were. While we don't condone extreme tactics, we don't condemn it. For the animals, for all the animals, not to harm any animal, human or otherwise, the radical energy, the blaze, put the company out of business. They also gave 20 baboons dried fruit and bananas. Xeroxing the militant vegan, reproduce this scene. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I'm really sorry for interrupting the beginning of your reading then. I was slow to the take there. All right, great. So now we've just got half an hour. We just wanted to introduce the half an hour before break with a bit of joint discussion, questions, if anybody's got any questions. Any of the speakers before we go for a bit of a breather. Yeah, has anybody got anything specifically? Should we go each speaker or should we have it as a free?
Just as someone who's also got a working class background, I wanted to know if you have any insight or advice on broaching the topic with relation to
I mean, it's funny, like, because I think it's. I hate to say this, but there's been a lot of talk around masculinities, and I think with me on a personal level, I think I get away with it quite a bit because of how I kind of present, right? I mean, I hate to say this, but I work out, you know, I sound a certain way, I look a certain way, and when I tell people I'm vegan, like within my family and sort of friendship groups, for example, or whatever situation I'm in, there's never really any sort of kickback to it. Funnily enough, the place where I've actually found most resistance is in academia. I only started in sociology a couple of years ago, and from thinking this would be like the safe space where everyone's kind of anti-oppression and we're all left-wing and socialist. Wow, was I surprised? I've never actually had any kickback from people within my community. What I have had is people like, you know, saying things like, you know, I don't care really, I don't give a shit about the animals, and that's a difficult one to cope with. And to kind of come back at somebody who says that without kind of coming across as angry, I do find that quite difficult. I'm like, well, what I usually say is, well, look, that's fair enough how you feel, but what I'll say is, like, if you've got you know, if you've got the time, just go onto one of the kind of activist websites and just maybe read a couple of articles, have a look at a couple of videos, and then see how you feel afterwards. Because I think a lot of the kickback that you get, it comes from a place of people just not engaging with like the reality. And it's almost like, you know, I hate, you know, carnism, right? Melly Joyce carnism, we know it's got like loads of like kind of problems. People are kind of, you know, have debates around it, and they you know, they use the word carn, which is meat in Latin and all that. But I do think there's a lot of good theory in there, and it is that kind of, we are socialising and like not really caring, and a lot of people just go through without even engaging with it at all. And I think, yeah, that's how what I normally say is, look, I'll send you something, you know, I've got your number, I'll send you something, and it'll be maybe, depending on the person, I'll kind of assess what I think they might be able to cope with. So I might just send them a link to I don't know, like an article on Viva, for example, right? And that's it. But in terms of my family, like, I mean, I've been really supportive. In fact, my mum and my stepdad is like a proper rough Geordie builder, right? And he's gone vegan. He's gone vegan the last few years, to the point where people on his sites are bringing him vegan sausage rolls and vegan chocolate and stuff. So it's been really inspiring, to be honest with you. And I always look at it like this: conversation. Like, each person you deal with on an individual level, and you kind of try and gauge how you feel that person will react to maybe engaging with the video, engaging with an article. That's terrible advice. I'm really sorry, but I hope it kind of give a little bit of an answer.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And again, thank you for your presentation.
But thank you for your question and your kind words. I really appreciate it. Solidarity.
Thank you. Well, we take that by speaking. No, this is it. Well, I'm just performing anyway. Ryan, do you think constructing these working? Yeah, I'll come back. Sorry. Hi, Norman.
You're muted.
Is that Melda? Yeah.
Hi, it's Melda.
Hello, Melda. How are you doing?
Thanks for your presentation. It was lovely to listen to you again this week. My question is, do you think constructing these like vegan working class identities are effective to the animal advocacy movement? And like where can we go from here? What do you see as the benefit to the movement in terms of identity construction, and what are the challenges as well?
You know what, Melda, I really don't know, because I'm so early into research. Ultimately, like my desire to do this is based on like a very simple premise. Looking, like, you know, I've been vegan for years, and kind of, you know, realizing that actually a lot of the messages don't resonate in the community that I'm from. I just want those messages to resonate, and I want to see the development of I suppose, a solidarity with non-human animals who are, you know, oppressed, and with humans who are oppressed as well. And I believe that obviously in this country, I can only talk from like the perspective of this country, right? That like there is systemic oppression. So I would like to kind of formulate a working class veganism that is based upon solidarity with another oppressed class. And I consider non-human animals to be a social class. Obviously, you know, people can argue, well, you know, they're not part of like human society. Well, they are part of human society, and these animals that we slaughter, that we use for work, that, you know, we race in horse races and dog racing, right? These are a social class. So I just hope that an organization can construct a message that gets people from my community to engage with it, and then to become vegan through it from purely solidaristic stance. And I can't look any further beyond that at the minute. You know, it's a kind of utopian vision, and one that might not come off, but as I say, it's something that I'm kind of striving for.
Yeah. Well, on. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Family. Yeah, you might be sorry. To make sure you. Thank you. Cameron, just you're at the point where you just kind of find out. It seems really like you've been thought about it for a very long time. I was just wondering, are you specifically looking at like demographic industries? You said at
again, you want to go for, you know, I don't know, sort of make market. Then there's the transactions or the genders type of it.
Yeah. Yes, this is, I think, one of the things that, yeah, many different out of better representations. Is that, yeah, essentially, once interview across all different genders, way I kind of classified kind of. Maybe we should just have one.
Yeah, maybe you have, yeah.
Sure. Can people online hear me better standing here? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So in terms of my yeah, like idea of life histories, like I don't come back with this genders, men, basically any men, trans men, cis men, or kind of maybe perhaps non-binary men who identify with masculinity and neurodiversity. That'll be inclusive of that, and then I can conduct other kind of interviews. Then women, trans women, cis women, non-binary within that as well. So yeah, it's definitely something that I've reflected on. I think it will be interesting to kind of see what you know, if I do conduct about them, what could come out. I don't think something massive.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
My question is also for Cameron. So before you sit down, actually good. Everyone hearing okay from kind of this close to life colleague. Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation. The term tromasculinity is one I've not encountered before today. So would you be able to kind of provide a bit more of a definition as to what tromasculinity is?
Yeah. So Daggett in their paper introduced heteromasculinity. Essentially to talk about the combination of kind of a hyper-masculine kind of move towards kind of like right-wing hyper-masculine kind of like politics in a way that's also kind of ingrained with kind of like fossil fuel and like fossil fuel capitalism. So taking figures like Donald Trump as like an example, where clearly his brand is really based on kind of misogynistic attitude and, you know, clearly, you know, kind of that form of like hyper-masculine misogyny, and also kind of linking that to kind of fossil fuel capitalism. One of the other examples they talk about is kind of this trend in the in the run-up to the US elections of like voting. So when men fit, and it was pretty much used to fit their cars out, so they can make as much smoke as possible, and then going up to the targets included some future figures in front of this, PETA protesters, cyclists, and just women. Sometimes some of the figures included things like women wearing coal. So this kind of link between fear on masculinity and like, fossil fuels and coal and energy as something that's intertwined. And perhaps on what was maybe on one hand we see like on Elon Musk, there is something to might call like eco-model masculinity. So, you know, elements of kind of environmentalism are still very much kind of maintaining as like a slight variation, whereas other people like complex figures and things like that almost go the opposite way of completely rejecting anything to do with eco-modelism and, you know, making that.
Thank you, that's really useful. John.
Yeah, sorry, this is not the question, but so there was PhD worked on this, not particularly vegan masculinities, but how like gender plays out in the animal rights movement. And a few years ago, she said she's done research on like the demographics of the group, and what has stuck with me. This was like years ago, but this has stuck with me. If we look at the movement, like majority of the main leaders or the vegan influencers are male, and like particularly like white, like heteronormative male. But majority of work, activist charity work, is done by women, and I'd be interested to see how that would play out in like the amount of activist work that human masculinity and how that like relates to your PhD research.
Yeah, no, that's a really great thing. Yes, my master's did one of the interesting things about that when I was doing my master's in lockdown, and what some of the people I spoke to essentially said, yeah, we have loads of women really like the whole movement, and back in lockdown, and suddenly like work, like they have to go out and do produce, and it was essentially just run a Zoom meeting. Suddenly a small group of men trials and became dominant. But there wasn't. Yeah, so I think it's really interesting to explore, you know, kind of when these sort of gender dynamics come out in
leadership.
Yeah, like it, our minority, you know, men making up like minority numbers of nominated leadership, and are they using those systems actually not around?
Yeah. Thank you. Good luck.
Okay. Nolan, yeah? Want to go, Nolan?
Is that me? Did I hear my name there? I did. Once again, I'm putting me to the computer, which makes no difference whatsoever. I think it's just related to what Louis was discussing. That use of like language in sort of referring to non-human animals as mother. I just wanted to say that I think that's really like powerful, and based on not based on any research that I've done, but just based on purely on lived experience of using this kind of language over the years. I often try and use the words like daughter and son when you're talking about the birth of a calf, for example. And I think like people that I've engaged with using those kind of words, I think it does have a really strong impact, because it's a lot of people for the first time they'll hear a calf birthed by a female cow as daughter or son, and I think it just resonates quite intensely with a lot of people. Actually, I know that it certainly has with friends and family of mine. And as I say, I'm not saying this was the specific reason why my mum and my stepdad went vegan, but it's another part of that impact that you can have on people. It's kind of gentle. It's almost like a gentle way of kind of introducing people to this to veganism by using these words. And could we argue that there's an anthropomorphic element to it, perhaps? But ultimately, a baby calf is the daughter of someone, is the son of someone. And I've had a couple of friends who've gone vegan as well in my social circle because of these types of conversations. I just wanted to say I thought that was really great, actually. Cheers.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much. That's really nice to hear. Thank you. And I think that using those sorts of language that you're talking about, I think that in itself is an effective piece of activism, as you're exemplifying. Just quickly on the anthropomorphizing thing, I don't know if anyone else has resonated with anyone else, but I've experienced people using the idea that I'm anthropomorphizing as a way to kind of block me from saying that other animals have relationships with each other. So I think that I would love to hear someone, it's a piece of research I think could be done to kind of anti-vegan environmentalist perspective that tries to use anthropomorphism as a kind of weapon to bash vegans for trying to recognize beyond human interest in other animals. But yeah, thank you.
I go, yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes.
This is going to be a big question, but probably, I don't know, yeah, the writing up stage might not help that much. But I was just thinking about, I know this is a bit more of a cynical view, like we're in a room of really, like we're pretty much all on board with it. But when it comes to trying to change the like mainstream narrative, having, you know, if there are these ads or these campaigns that your research is saying like this is actually like adding to it's problematic, I agree with definitely. Is it, where does the balance come for trying to turn the tide? Because if we can get more people turning, basically it's a question of if we can get more people turning vegan at whatever cost, is that helping? I would argue not really, but how do we do it? Maybe what are the solutions to trying to turn it down?
Yeah. Yeah, it's great speaking that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. It's one that comes up often. And I think that's kind of what I was trying to draw attention to at the end when I said about authenticity with community. First of all, I think that the existence of loads of different types of vegan activism all at the same time is really important. Say, get rid of any type. I think all of it together, doing all sorts of angles, some of which are more product than others, is good. Second, I think that with that in mind, I'm speaking to specifically a kind of I don't know, we'll use utopia, kind of idealized form of activism, which also can be used within the vegan rising up to think about non-human animals in ways that I mean, I think, you know, celebrate their veganism better, but it's like, I think that we need beyond that. I'm kind of reluctant to use comparison, but I think that the way that I've tried to explain this to the non-vegan group when I talk about it, if the, say for example, you know, if the feminist movement, if people start to frame things as oh, but we're trying to give women opportunities to work within the industry because it's really good for the industry. That's not doing anything for you know, liberation. So I think, yeah, I don't know. But I think that's the same thing. If we're wanting to liberate non-human because you, that's okay, one step in the right direction. The whole is not do that, anything that radical. But yeah, I think the main answer is loads of activism on various different levels of product.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to get back to because I was knowledge in my I think it's very important to like define it in the opposite or not connected to activism because it happens often in a mass when people mix it up. Very interested in talking about. I mean, I'm also very interested in how to look at something like in a trans-species way, how to like understand it that we also fight other people, but we don't give it that name. Because when we stop talking about other people, we like, for example, that are different in whatever way from us, we sort of like use this. Then we get back to the card and okay, we don't know anything, so we can't talk about other people. We also can talk about ourselves, and we also use this this how to talk about ourselves and about other people. So this is also very important. see how to basically destabilize this negative picture of consciousness. And if I also connected to that, I wanted to ask you, are you also going to because you also talked about it, which is very present in the paper, it's also not interactive and start and go positive. I'm also interested in that kind of similarity.
Okay, so the first one was and I really liked what you were just saying about stopping anthropomorphism always in these things are really negative, you know. And I agree that we're always going to anthropomorphize because we can't step outside of our own perspective, so we're always going to get some perspective on other animals as well as other people, as you said. I don't think anthropomorphizing is necessarily always a negative thing. For sure, it can be part of it, maybe it has to be part of it. But it's just imposing intentions. You know, yesterday we saw some type programming. Like, another is like, oh, my dog's having such a nice time having this makeover or whatever. That sort of anthropomorphism is just really terrible kind of way of imposing interest into others. And we have a bit about the technical stuff and detail. I'll skip over a bit in the middle.
Yeah, I was talking about this comparison between against fire, against fire.
Yeah. That's a big section. It's a whole section of my PhD. That kind of is also inextricably linked to all the other points. That's right. I can do that. But, it's in there because, and the way I talk about it is because by making sensitive comparisons, you're centering a kind of privileged white perspective and experience that doesn't feel the kind of harms of those comparisons. Therefore, it's anthropocentric because importantly, anthropocentric in the West is the centering of the colonial white perspective. So a lack of intersectionality is anthropocentric. And loads of what I'm talking about is how that what happens, that's going to have negative effects for all everyone in existence can be in both that and that in very different ways. They kind of affect them. And he's definitely getting fixed up, as well as I feel with some of their kind of.
Yeah. Hi, Natalie. If you could be quick, that would be ideal if possible. Sorry.
I just had a quick question for Norman. So thank you so much for your presentation. I was wondering about genealogies of working class veganism in the UK. One of the things that comes up in the Militant Vegan magazine is lots of coverage of hunt stabbing in the 90s, and that feels like that's always been a working class movement. And I was wondering kind of where those kind of histories kind of fit into your wider project.
Well, in terms of hunt stabbing, I mean, that's a great point. Where this state that I'm from, the area that I'm from, there was no, as far as I can remember, and as far as I'm aware, any sort of hunt stabbing movement as such, right? And whether or not specific individuals from the area went hunt stabbing, I don't know. Finding out would probably be, I mean, be interesting exercise to undertake, and something that you've really made me contemplate doing now, actually. But the other thing is that what I have been contemplating doing is there's an archive where you can access food diaries that have been written since I think from the 40s through to the 70s. And that's something that I'm looking at because I think it'd be really interesting to explore these food diaries to see whether or not there was actually anyone who was from the region, maybe actively vegan, or whose diet was overwhelmingly vegan, and to see whether or not there's sort of any family relations kind of built around those diaries as well. So it's not something I've considered, but you've really given us something to think about. That's a dead interesting point. In terms of Sabin itself, it definitely, as far as I'm aware, there wasn't, because where I'm from, right, it's a very urban environment. So fox hunting's not, I don't think, something that would have come on most people's radars. But yeah, that's a great suggestion. I'm definitely looking at the food diaries, that's for sure. But what you've just said there is something I'm going to try and tap into now, or just kind of maybe have a look at briefly. And if you know anything, then if you know anyone, anything, give us a shout. Let me know.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you guys. I think that's wraps up session 1. It's been fun. I enjoyed hearing everyone speak. What we're going to do is just to have a break. We'll take 10 minutes now and just start session 2 10 minutes later. Okay, so people will come back at around 11. All right, thank you very much to all the speakers and questions.
Good.